When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Rocking Chair. User: DD3. Posted April 16th, 1998.
My grandma passed away last week. She was 71. For the last few months, she'd been in hospice, drifting in and out of awareness, barely responsive most days. The nurses told us it was normal, that the body and mind start shutting down near the end, but it was hard to see her like that. So quiet, so small. She'd always been a force, the matriarch of our family. She was the kind of person who could hold a whole room captive with just a story and make everyone feel at peace with her smile. But then, a couple of nights before she died, she came back. I had been sitting in the chair next to her bed, reading, when she stirred. Not just the slight shifts she had made before, but a real movement. Her hand twitched, then lifted, reaching weakly toward me. I took it, thinking she might need something, but when I looked down, her eyes were open, clear and focused, more lucid than they had been in weeks. My body filled with warmth. Her eyes told me all I needed to know. This was the woman I loved. "I have to tell you something," she said. Her voice pretty rough, barely more than a whisper, but it was steady. She gripped my wrist with surprising strength, her fingers cold and thin. I leaned in close, unsure what to do, still lost in the bask of having my grandmother back for this moment. "I have to tell you about the house on Sycamore Hill." I didn't get it at first, and she must have seen the look of confusion on my face because I felt her grip tighten a little, and I realized she had been waiting for this exact moment. She said she was only 10 years old when her family moved into the house. That was 1937. It was a grand old Queen Anne with a wide wraparound porch, high ceilings, and stained glass windows that threw colors across the hardwood floors when the sun hit just right. It was too big for him, but my grandfather had gotten it for next to nothing, and with his new management job at the mill, he had the cash to burn. Of course, the real reason was that my great-grandmother fell in love with it immediately, said it was the house of her dreams, and how could he turn his bride down, right? It has good bones. But my grandmother, she never liked it. She couldn't explain why, not at first, just that it felt off. The air was too heavy, the shadows too deep, and then there was Danny, her little brother. He was 5 at the time, quiet, sweet, not the kind of kid to make up wild stories, but within days of them moving in, he started telling us that he had an imaginary friend named Thomas. At first, my great-grandparents thought it was normal, just a little boy adjusting to a new place, but Danny didn't act like other kids with imaginary friends. He never played with Thomas. He talked about him like he was real, like he'd always been there. One night at dinner, Danny set his fork down and looked up at them with wide, serious eyes. "It's his house," he said. "He just lets us stay here." The room went quiet. My great-grandfather chuckled nervously, tried to brush it off, but my great-grandmother shot him a look. No one spoke about it again for several weeks. That's when the noise started. Footsteps in the hall at night, the slow creak of the stairs, like someone was coming down them. There were doors that drifted open just an inch, like they were watching. My great-grandfather dismissed it as the house settling, but even as a little girl, my grandmother knew better. She felt like something was off and knew that her parents did too. They just didn't want to admit it. She said the worst was the nursery. It was on the second floor, a bright, airy room with a rocking chair and a crib left behind by the previous owners. My great-grandmother had intended on clearing it out, but somehow she never got around to it, and maybe there was a reason for that, because at night, when the house was quiet, the rocking chair moved back and forth. Back and forth. After a few months, Danny started changing. It was slow, like a creeping sickness. He stopped eating much. He spoke in whispers, sometimes to the family, but mostly to the empty spaces where he said Thomas stood. He refused to go into certain rooms, said they weren't for them, said they never had been. Then, one afternoon, Danny just up and disappeared. It was summer, hot and still. He had been playing in the backyard, running through the high grass, laughing. My grandmother said she heard it, one of those bright, breathless laughs kids make when they're truly happy, and then nothing. She called for him. No answer. Fear began to creep up on her. She searched the house first, every room, every closet, every inch of attic space, before finally telling her parents. They brushed it off for a moment, but she pleaded, said she swore she knew something bad had happened, so my great-grandfather began calling out for Danny as well, stomping through the hallways, threatening him that he better come out now before he gets what's coming to him. But it didn't take long for my great-grandparents to realize that the situation was pretty dire, so they called the police. Within an hour, all of our neighbors were out combing the woods around our place, and the police taking statements. My great-grandfather called Danny's name into the twilight so much his voice became hoarse and breaking, but still, Danny was nowhere. Over the following weeks, my great-grandmother stopped eating. She sat in the nursery in that rocking chair, listening. My great-grandfather just sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Then, one night, they heard him. His laughter, muffled, distant, coming from inside the walls. It was soft at first, then louder, rippling through the house like an echo of something lost. My grandmother pressed her ear to the nursery wall and swore she felt something breathing on the other side. My great-grandfather immediately ran out to his shed out back and grabbed a hammer, which he then took to the wall, pounding feverishly over and over again as it splintered away, only to reveal nothing. He dropped to his knees and started crying. That night, my great-grandparents took my grandmother and left. They didn't pack, didn't turn off the lights, just walked out the front door and never looked back. Her brother was never found. When my grandmother finished the story, she exhaled slowly and went quiet. For a long time, she just stared at me, her fingers still wrapped around my wrist. Then, she looked down at my hand and whispered something so soft I barely heard it. "He still talks to me." The next morning, she was gone. I don't know why I feel the need to share her secret. After all, I didn't even know she had a sibling, but maybe it's because I want to believe her that in spite of everything she had been through, in that moment, we connected. Then again, maybe it's because last night, as I lay awake in the dark, I heard something. A creaking like a rocking chair, moving back and forth, back and forth.
Subject, Substation. User, Witspace 3223. Posted April 24th, 1996.
If you've never had someone you care about go missing, it's hard to fully communicate what it does to your life. My sister Emily went missing when I was 9 years old, and by the time anyone remembered I was still there, I'd figured out how to manage on my own. It sounds bad when I write it out like that, but trust me when I say it worked out as best as possible. Instead of turning inward, I've dedicated my life to helping people who find themselves in the same situation. Did you know that the Salvation Army has a missing persons bureau right here in Baltimore? I bet you didn't. The organization has been around for a long time and does a lot of good, but many people don't know that we have an entire wing dedicated to helping people locate lost family members across the USA. I started working for the Salvation Army in the 1970s under Major Norma Roberts, back when we'd get almost 1,000 search requests every month. It's hard going. Despite our best efforts, we find maybe 50 people per year, but when you can connect someone to a loved one they thought they'd lost, it's worth every day you work 12 hours coming up with nothing. After 12 hours of having people hang up on you or finding someone and learning that the person who sent you on the search is an abuser looking to find a victim who ran, you don't have time for much else. Mostly, I come home, heat up a TV dinner, and fall asleep watching TV. Having a social life isn't something I think about or aspire to. I even chose this house because there aren't many neighbors around. The place to my right is a rental that can't ever seem to keep tenants, and the place to my left isn't a place at all. It's an electrical substation. You've probably seen places like it before. They're built to look just the same as a house to the casual glance, but if you get close enough, you can see it. Heavy steel front doors with warning signs on them, windows that don't open and never light up, a chain-link privacy fence in the backyard that's just a little higher than normal. Some people are weird about living next to places like that. They think there are health implications or something, but those people are frankly stupid. I've always loved living here because the only foot traffic that house gets is the odd technician coming in and out. Well, at least that's what I thought. About a month ago, one hell of a flu ripped through the office and I got it bad. I spent the better part of the week either in the company of the toilet or dozing on the kitchen floor at odd hours. Why the kitchen floor, you ask? Because it was cold, and if there were any, shall we say, accidents, they'd be easy to clean up. My fever was so high that I was having conversations with family members I hadn't seen in years, including Emily, who looked radiant and told me that she was okay, that I shouldn't worry. Emily said the hard part for her hadn't lasted long and was a distant memory now. She said that the world I knew, the one she'd left behind, was just a small fraction of the universe, and that one day soon she would be able to show me exactly what that meant. Even in that compromised state, the word soon stood out, and I asked my dead sister exactly how soon was soon. All I got in return was a smile that hadn't been dimmed even a bit by the pain and cruelty heaped upon her at the end of her life. Then she was gone, and I was alone in a pool of sweat underneath my kitchen table as moonlight shone through the sheer curtains above my kitchen sink. I remember hearing my own shallow breathing, the ticking of the clock above my living room door, and underneath it all, a buzzing. The buzzing was unfamiliar. It wasn't the light fuzz of fluorescent lights or even of a TV that had recently been turned off, but harsh and metallic. From the sound of it, it wasn't in the room with me, but had to be coming from nearby. The pool of sweat, plus the fact I felt like I could actually stand on my own 2 feet again, suggested my fever had broken at some point in the night. I tentatively rose to my hands and knees, waiting for the abdominal twinge that had presaged my many recent trips to the bathroom, but it never came. Instead, using the table as leverage, I pulled myself up to my feet and tried not to think about the smell coming off me. A shower was clearly the next step. Well, not quite the next step. First, I had to take care of my nagging curiosity around the buzzing. I followed the sound, my socked feet scuffing slightly along the kitchen tile to the window on the opposite wall. The view from the window was that of the fake house substation, and for a second, it all made sense. Power company equals electricity equals buzzing. The side door was open, casting a rectangle of light onto the side porch, which suggested a tech was putzing around. This put all the elements in place for a completely prosaic explanation. I was just about to turn away and head for the shower when I saw something that didn't fit. It was, well, this won't make any sense, but silhouetted in the light of the door, I saw what looked like the Cowardly Lion from Wizard of Oz. For a second, I thought I was still hallucinating because I'd always associated Oz with Emily. When I was 6, Dad took us to see it at the Parkway Theater, and the flying monkeys had scared the hell out of me. I remember Em taking my hand and soothing me, telling me that the monkeys weren't real, that it was just an actor in a suit. She always seemed to know so much back then, more than me at any rate. As the strange shadow moved out of the doorway beyond where I could see it, it seemed as though gaps opened in the night. I couldn't actually see them, but it was like the air itself separated, and every single particle in the universe was vibrating. It felt like everything was possible, like time and space were things I could cross with a thought. I had a wild thought, a certainty really, that matinee of Oz was still happening, and if I got to the Parkway in time, Emily, Dad, and I would still be there. Or if I crossed the lightless section of yard between me and that open doorway, I could walk through it and into that endless universe she'd been talking about. A moment later, the shadow of a tall man stepped into that glowing frame, its eyes burning red. I heard Emily's voice softly whisper my name in my right ear, and then passed out. When I finally came to in the morning, my flu was gone completely, but I couldn't shake the sense of unreality I'd experienced the night before. It was as if I'd been dislodged from my life and was at right angles to everything. Back at work, it was difficult to focus on any of the open files, and I screwed up a few intake interviews because I couldn't shake the feeling that none of the people speaking to me were real. It hasn't gone away, not really, I still go to work, still go through the motions of pretending that there's anything left here of interest to me, but between you and me and this computer, the only things that feel real to me are that open substation door, the light that filled it, and the things inside. Every minute I'm not at that office, I watch the substation. So far, it's only been workmen coming and going, but there's something else happening, I know it. The gaps are beginning to open again, and through them, I can feel the outlines of things, like shapes under black velvet. I see the past that was and the past that wasn't, the futures that will never be. I see you, yes, you. You're reading this, but not reading it at the same time. I don't understand it yet, but I will. The tide that washed out on that feverish night is coming back in, and this time I'm going with it, through the substation door and into whatever is on the other side.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.